we're gonna let them talk, like 15 minutes, I guess, a piece. We'll do one at a time. Herb will go first, and then I'm gonna coax Jean to try and just talk a little bit. I'll ask you some questions. It'll be very easy for you. You don't have to speak. Less than 15 minutes, just 5 minutes, yeah. And then maybe we'll let John go, or Brainerd. You guys can fight it out right up here. But it's very casual. We just really want them to talk about what it was like, what their memories are, the things that we wouldn't be aware of, special things that happened in their lives in Easton. That'll make it more interesting. So, Herb? You can sit if you want.
No, I think I want to speak.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Herb Silverman. I feel like in all due respect, the junior senior here today, so I may have a little less to say, hopefully. What I want to talk about is a little bit of my history, the farm history of Silverman's, so we can parallel it the best I can to what I can remember as the kind of history of Easton as I see it. I'm the youngest of 8 kids. The oldest sibling is my brother, and I am the youngest. Harold is 14 and a half years older than me, and my mom always said she'd never stop changing diapers for 16 years, and they weren't disposable. My dad grew up in New York City with just his mother. When he was very young, 14 or 15, he got ran over by a horse and buggy. He was in the hospital for a long time, and the doctors wanted to amputate his leg, and my grandmother said, no way. A year later, he was walking as well as you and I. But he didn't like the city after that. He left his mom there for a while, and he moved to Bridgeport. He started working on cow farms, he used to tell me these stories, for $1 a day. And the farmer would say, the horses don't stop. You run ahead of them, open the door. When they go out, you run back and you close it. But of course, milk was 5 cents, bread was 3 cents, so I guess he managed. This was in the early 20s, and of course, there was a war effort going on. Besides working on the cow farms, he got a job at Remington Arms. He became very valuable because he was very wiry and very fast, and they wanted to keep him so he didn't go into the First World War, which I was very happy about. He was able to save some money and able to buy his first piece of land in Easton. However, there was prejudices in those days, just like there is unfortunately today, but they wouldn't sell to a Jew, the realtors. My wife told me not to say this, but I'm saying it. So he got someone to buy it for him, and for a commission, they sold it back to him. So that's how he got his first piece of land in Easton. Then,
What year was that?
in the 20s, early 20s.
For John Candy.
So then he wanted to build a cider mill. This is very interesting. Somehow he got credit, and on Banks Road, it's not there anymore. It was a huge cider mill. It was not only Depression time, but it was Prohibition time. Trucks would line up on Saturday when I was about this big. Everybody had big yards, and everybody had trees. So they'd bring their 50-gallon barrels and their truckload of apples, and he would crush them, or press them as we call it, for about $5 a barrel. At the same time, my wife also told me not to tell this story, but he would deliver cider to what he called the speakeasies in Bridgeport. But it was sweet cider, very legal. 2 or 3 weeks later, it was hard cider. And he would go down, I guess, with horse and buggies at night or whatever and deliver. And that helped him get his business going, because wanting to be a farm doesn't happen overnight. He eventually bought more land, but the whole hill where we are now was what I call a forest. There's no chainsaws, there's no big bulldozers. If there were, sure as heck he couldn't afford them. Everything was cleared by hand with saws. If anybody ever remembers those I used to call them wheelless wheelbarrows. They didn't have, they had a scoop in the front and 2 handles, and the horses would pull them. And that's how he cleared the terraces after he pulled the trees down. So he would plant an acre as he cleared it, and as the farm grew, he grew what I call into a truck farm. I don't think anybody uses that expression today, but a truck farm is a farm that raises everything. You know, from lettuce, scallions, strawberries, tomatoes, apples, peaches, you name it. You don't do what you do today and specialize. So that's how he started to build the farm. But I'm going to have to regress now. He met my mother, who worked in Bridgeport, just when he started the cider mill. And as I said, I'm one of the youngest of 8 kids. And she'd always tell me the story when she met him. And he proposed. His heritage was from England, and she thought he was a cold Englishman. 8 kids later, she never said that again. So, anyway, he's getting married, so he had to build a house. At the same time, Hemlock Reservoir was being developed by the Bridgeport Hydraulic Company. I don't know if that's what it was called in those days. And they were selling houses for, and I don't remember, $50 or $100 a house. If you take them down, take them apart, and get them out of there. Well, he did that, and the house we all grew up in, right next to the market, basically are homes that came out of the Easton Reservoir, which I think is interesting. Anyway, now I'm going to have to look at my notes. So, also, you know, starting a farm, it doesn't happen overnight, so he had to get apples to press cider, to sell to the speakeasies, etc. So there was 2 big orchards in Easton, and one was Slady's, and the other one was Sam Senior. People might have heard of Seniors, but that was where today Morning Glory and Rosewood and Westwood Drive area is. That used to be a big orchard. So he would buy apples from them and Slady's, and then he would press that at his mill. And again, am I going to regress? He brought his mother in before he got married, and he just had this mill before he built a house or anything. On the mill, which I remember, but not going back that clear, there was 2 rooms. One was where his mother lived for the first few years with a coal stove. The other didn't even have heat in it. And of course, in those days, a lot of people had outhouses. So that's how he got started. And then once he got the house done, then he got married. He lost his mother just before it was done and proceeded to have 8 children. So I don't forget my place here. Just a little history that I remember too is when we wanted to go to Bridgeport, and I remember going to Hebrew school on a bus, there was a CRNL bus line which went from Greiser's store to Helzak's store. I think there's 1 or 2 stops going down. Went down all the way. I'd get off at Fairfield Avenue and go all the way down State Street to Main Street, Bridgeport. You think of the good old days. Well, Mom let us kids go down to Los Poli Majestic Theater to go to a movie. She didn't worry about getting clubbed or getting robbed or anything. It was a very safe time, and we enjoyed it. You know, it's like today, you know, you can't leave your kid without turning your back. So when you say the good old days, a lot of it was the good old days. Really, really enjoyed those memories. Another funny story is the Easton Firehouse. A lot of people that haven't been here for years don't remember this, but back in the 40s and early 50s, there were phones, but there was no plectrons, no cell phones, and it was all volunteer firemen. My dad was one, so I was a little active when I was young with running the fires with him. But how'd you know where the fire was? Well, there's a big horn on top, which would go off to test 8 in the morning and 6 at night. So we knew it was working. If you lived next door, you were used to it. If you had company, it scared the living hell out of you. It was like the Queen Mary in your backyard, you know? But everybody had a code book. So the horn would go off, and let's say it was the code and do it 3 times. So I'll use the code 3, 2, 1, and go boop, 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 boop. People would hear it, they'd go outside, get their book, look up 321, and it might say Banks Road. Well, they knew what road it was on anyway, and they would get in the cars and run and help with the fire. And basically that's how the Easton Volunteer Fire Company worked in those days. It's very, very interesting. As we grew up, of course the schools were small, we're not going back too far, but Staples School was, I went from kindergarten to 9th grade. Nobody goes to school 10 years in one school unless they stay back. So that's a long time. Then I went to Bassick, which all my sisters did, for 1 year, and then Barlow opened up in 1959. The Easton directory, the history says it opened up from 7th to 12th. Well, it opened up from 7th to 11th because we started as a junior year at Barlow. The first graduating class was the next year, which I was in, so I was the first graduating class. And we're having a reunion in a couple weeks, which should be very interesting. And then as far as myself is concerned, then I went on to the University of Bridgeport because that's the only place I could go on to school and still work on the farm. But all my sisters helped. Everybody in those days, of course, had big families to help out on farms. So, you know, we weren't any different. The girls mostly would be, you know, helping, doing planting in the greenhouse or picking strawberries or working in the market. And it was, you know, nice because it's part of your heritage. She can tell their kids and my kids how we grew up and what we did. And, it was very, very good memories. Just would talk about a little bit quickly, take up any more time, how I think times have changed and almost come full circle. In those days, and I have a picture over here of the roadside stand. This is just before I was born. Everybody came up from the towns to buy at farms bushels of lettuce, bushels of cabbage, whatever, and they froze and canned everything. There were no super Stop and Shops. There were no box stores. As people moved out of the country, the box stores emerged, and everything was there. The farms sold to the big box stores. And now, of course, everybody buys 2 pounds of tomatoes and 3 pounds of this and 2 pounds of that. Nobody buys by the bushel anymore. In that picture, everything almost is by bushels. But again, because everybody moved away from the farms, the next generation never grew up like we did. So now we've, of course, Silverman's has changed into more of what I call an agritourism business. Because people come up and say, when I was a kid, these were the farms. And these kids have never seen, especially inner city kids. So they get on a tractor, which they never had. They go up and they pick fruit off a tree, which they always thought grew in super Stop and Shop. They pick one, they eat one. They see what it's like. And of course, then mom and dad, when it's a full circle, then they have to pick them and show them that they can make a pie. You know, so so we're back to full circle again, and they do some canning and freezing. I hear more about it now. The kids haven't seen animals, a cow, a sheep, a goat. They go to the animal farm, they see it, and unfortunately that's because they've all moved away, and these young kids only see what they see on TV. So our farm, and I've tried to parallel this with how Easton has changed too, has become more of a place for learning. And children really, if you were ever there on the weekend, see these little kids wanting to get on a tractor, wanting to pick a peach or an apple or see an animal. It really has made my life a lot of fun. And I've probably forgotten a few things, but thank you very much. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Thank you, Herb. I want to change the talk, and she doesn't want to talk, so I'm going to try and, I'm just going to ask her a few questions and just answer the same way you did before. But you first moved here with your husband in the 1950s, right? But neither of you grew up in Easton, even though the Everetts go back over 150 years.
Right.
So I was curious why, and I asked you this, and so you're answering me again, but you're answering them for the first time. Why, what made your husband and you want to move to Easton?
Well, his family had that big piece of property where we finally built a house. And my be nice to live up this way. And the family decided to, after they acquired, his immediate family acquired all that land, decided to give him that piece of property down to the main road and up to Everett Road. It was about 28 acres, I guess. So we built our house. It took 2 years to build it because we were living in Stratford at the time and having children. I'd bring them up, when we were building the house, I'd bring the kids up for the morning, and then they'd have to go back to Stratford for their naps, because in those days, that's the way we did things. And come back again. And so that was a long process, building the house, and finally we got into it. And it's been a delightful life ever since. Now, I have a few books here. This is one of them. And there are a couple more on the table. And thanks to Dan Cruson, you'll get a lot of information from that that you won't get from me.
Well, if I could say, it really is a terrific book. It tells the history, not only of the Everett family, but all the families that lived in what was Stratford West Woods, in the northwest corner of Easton. A part of Easton that at one time was not part of Fairfield, and yet became part of Easton, which was part of Fairfield. It was part of Stratford, but the people in Stratford didn't care so much about their northwest corner, just like the people in Fairfield didn't care about that northwest corner of Stratford. So this book really brings to life a part of Easton that I don't think you knew, and Dan says in his book he had no idea what a rich history there was in that spot. And I think it's a terrific book, and thanks to Jean for asking Dan to write it. It's just great. I did have a question for you too, because like I said, I was over in the Historical Society doing a little quick research, and I came across an article from, I think it was about 1983. Now you all probably know the Everett Tree Farm, and it was a story about them receiving a plaque from, I guess, like the National Christmas Tree Farmers group that said they were an official, a certified tree farm, Christmas tree farm. And I was curious what got you involved in farming trees?
Well, I remember planting those trees and saying, we're going to get $10 a tree. And every time we planted a tree there, we're going to get $10 when these grow up, And that tree farm has developed into something quite nice now. My son, who lives around the corner on Sherwood Road now, has taken over the farm, and he's still maintaining it. But of course, it's the popular thing to do in Easton to have a tree farm, so lots of competition.
Did you find it was more work than you thought it was? You didn't come from a farming background.
No. Oh, I never thought of it as work,
No?
particularly. No, I didn't have to work hard. I'll plant and do it. I enjoy it. So,
Is there anything else that you
it's been a wonderful place to live. We're lucky to have this
Thanks so much for
beautiful
coming.
town.
Thanks, Jean.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not shy about talking, so I can understand why she might be. So that I wanted her to talk. because
I got
think
one
so.
question for her.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is one of those your family tree?
Oh. Okay, you're done with questions. Not shy. Brandon, would you like to speak next? If you have-
All right. Well, of course, preface this, I brought a book along here, the Easton Volunteer Fire Company's 75th anniversary, of which I participated in assembling this and compiling it as a volunteer fireman's historian. I say that braggingly, of course. I think, and in the front part is the history of the fire department, and Harold brought up a little bit about the fire company. I can add to that. His dad lived right close to the firehouse, so I believe from what I did in my research, one reason he was made a driver was because he was right-handy to the fire truck, and Helzak was another driver. And Helzak went out one night, and the old truck they had in those days had no cabin on it, no windshield, and his face got all frozen. He got a terrible case of frostbite. So then they proceeded to save up their pennies and get a one that had a windshield on it anyway. But we progressed a long way, as you well know, from that point of 1920 when the company was started. Now, right here, I brought some notes here. And I also brought something in case anybody's never seen this map of Easton back in 1867 map. And I listed some of the one-room schoolhouses. And as they were talking, gosh, I brought so many memories, but they go in one side and out the other. I could go on all day long. This is my favorite subject, though, growing up in Easton. So anyway, I wouldn't want to grow up anyplace else, I can tell you that. So I have a list of some of the schools, and this map here, if anybody wants to peruse that later on.
I might just interject, we actually have copies of the map that Brainerd was just showing.
Oh, okay, well, I didn't know they had that or not. A lot of this is you may already know, with a few of you who are new to Easton may not know this, to give a general idea of the structure of the town. And then I live down in Sport Hill Parkway, an isolated part of Easton, and you know the hill's very steep, Sport Hill Road. You are familiar with Sport Hill Road, as it is today anyway. We didn't climb that too often. We did on a couple of occasions. One time, Harold was telling me about about the farm, and we ventured up to Silverman's farm one summer day when the strawberries were due to be picked. So we went up there, the crew of us from Sport Hill Parkway. This is like going to Alaska as far as we're concerned. And we get up on the side of the bank, and his dad said, okay, I'll give you 10 cents a bag, a basket. They were little teeny baskets. I guess they come the same way now, don't they?
Yeah.
Whatever they were. So we went up there all afternoon, and we picked strawberries. And we ate strawberries. After the day's efforts, we came down with 1 or 2 baskets and got our 10 cents or 20 cents. In the meantime, one of us went down to Helzak and got a quart of milk. So we had milk and strawberries. And milk. Then we all went home and proceeded to get sick. So that venture lasted 1 or 2 times, and then we said, well, this is not working out for us, not for us or for Benny. So anyway, to give you a layout of Easton at the time, and by the way, we moved to Easton in 1936. I was 5 going on 6 that summer, and that was June. And before I go on with my story here, I'll just tell you another story I heard recently at the Old Timers Night at the Easton Volunteer Fire Company. And some of the old timers show up for that are not very active anymore, but they always show up for Old Timers Night, free dinner. And Harold Candy, anybody know Harold Candy and Fred Candy? Their old family name. And we were all shooting the breeze, and we always eventually go back to the good old days, you know. And he said, oh, God, that house of ours on Church Street, that's where the old Candy Farm was. He said, oh, God, that house, 2 sides. He said, that was like a barn. At nighttime, that thing got so cold, that house was terrible. And then we always had to get up in the morning if our neighbor who had cows, I don't know who the neighbor he was, but anyway, he was telling the story, and I can only repeat what I heard. That our folks made me get up, and we had to go out and milk their cows, because the cows had to be milked every morning. So before he could go to school, he had to go milk, I guess, his own cows, his father's cows, and then go out and milk the neighbor's cows. So I guess he was pretty tired by the time he got to school. And I'll tell you some more about the farming aspect in town in those days, too. Well, long as I'm on that subject, then I go back. I remember one time in the 7th or 8th grade, I had several friends in my class, obviously, that were farm folks. One was Tommy Matlack, a good friend of mine. The old timers know Tommy. He's the hardest working man I ever knew. He had to get up and deliver the milk when it got a little older, and they had to process the milk. They had to bottle the milk and everything. In those days, of course, we had milkmen. You didn't go buy milk at a store. I never ever heard of that. The milkman came every couple of days and left the milk bottles at your kitchen door, and he'd read the note your mother put in the top. I want 2 quarts of milk and one pint of cream, or whatever it may be. And it showed up. And then, of course, a few days later, again, the note, the bottle, and so forth. And he took the old bottles away. Well, poor Tommy Matlack, he was a good friend of mine. But he was the hardest working man I ever saw. And, of course, Harold Silverman, he was another one. His father worked him to death. I can vouch for that. He worked on the farm too in the good old days, and he was another classmate of mine. Well, anyway, these farmers sometimes would be working during harvest season, planting season. They'd come to school and be so tired, they might fall asleep. The teacher would say, "Don't wake him up. He worked hard last night." Maybe referring to Tommy, let him sleep. So that went on two occasions. But hey, another thing about the town is we go to the carnival. I'm going to go back and forth here, jump around, not as organized as everybody said. But I stories pop into mind. I got my notes, but I'm going to skip around. So anyway, to start off, go back here with my notes and then maybe chronological order. Across the muck and the cow. We moved to Easton in 1936. I was going to be 6 that July, and the population was approximately 1,000 people. Sometimes it was 995, 1,000 something, and if I want to correct me, I'm doing this by memory now, you know. And but it was very small, and you knew everybody in town practically by name. Now I go to church, I go here, I go there. I don't know anybody, so I'm like a duck out of water around here. So, and when we moved to Easton, remember there's a depression on it, a terrible depression. 1936 we moved, 1930, of course the crash, 38, the depression, and we bought a house down in Sport Hill Park we just built by Bill Coon. And if everybody wanted to know, a fellow who's quite a guy was Bill Coon. And his father was Dr. Coon. And of course I'm skipping now, Dr. Coon made house calls. You don't hear about that anymore. House calls, and we made house calls on Dr. Coon too. And I understand sometimes the farmers would pay him in eggs and chickens and things like that. It's, that new paper money we got now, which is becoming worthless. I think we'll go back to chickens pretty soon. Things like that. But anyway, the depression was on. We bought the house, and my father, I remember, he got a nice barnyard fence built. Anybody came along wanted a little work. My father seemed to be affluent enough to hire somebody to do it. We got the flooring put in the attic, and the terrace just cement, you know, with a railing around it. He had that all closed in, a roof put on it, all that sort of thing. So there were two sides of the depression. One was if you had the wherewithal to get some work done, you got it done really cheaply, I guess. But anyway, Bill Coon built that house on Sport Hill Parkway, and I wrote these down, Fresh Meadow Road and Cold Spring, and we watched all the houses being built, by the way. This is prior to World War II. And that was quite an adventure. To say, we were kind of isolated down there in Sport Hill Parkway. And then, of course, he went off to the war. He was in the Merchant Marine, and his ship got sunk, by the way, and he was on a life raft for, I don't know, days. Maybe John knows the story better than I do. And he survived, and he came back, and then he built the houses over there across Sport Hill, on Sport Hill, what do they call it?
Lover's Lane.
No, yeah, Fresh Meadow, Cold Spring Road, Fresh Meadow Road, and I wrote down what was the other, Clover Lane, all that. Well, Bill Coon built all those houses. And back in there was a beautiful forest of cedar trees and pine trees, and I remember hiking through those, and Hank Taylor lived down that area and had a hill back there, and boy, we used to go over there skiing, because the country kids could ski and skate, and everything. About the time they learned to walk, we could learn all that stuff. Then, of course, what was it like? Of course, the radio shows. Oh yeah, then in 1938, of course, the hurricane came along. So we don't get done with the Depression, and now people are suffering from this hurricane. And I remember that hurricane, and I'll elaborate on that a little later. I hope I get back to that. But I wrote down someplace, but I had so many notes, I had to try to condense it to practically nothing. I told I could only talk 15 minutes. Well, that's a possibility, talk about your youth in Easton. Well, anyway, the radio shows in those days were the Shadow Nose and the Green Hornet. We would lie on the floor. Anybody remember the Shadow Nose?
Yes.
Whoa, don't look behind you, there might be someone there. Well, we traveled, my sister and I, lie on the floor and listened to Shadow on the radio. That was quite an invention, that radio in those days, isn't it? You know? And that was our nightlife. And well, let's jump ahead now to Staples School. Around 1934, I may stand corrected on this, I'm going by memory. Staples School was built around 1934, a couple of years before.
1930.
What?
30.
30? Oh, okay. What was before my time, anyway? And we had approximately, I stand corrected, 300 kids in the classroom. 30
No,
to,
in the school.
what?
30 kids in the class.
What did they say?
I thought you said 300.
No, we had 300 in the school, approximately, and about 300 in the classroom. And we had the teacher taught every subject. You know, you stayed in one room, and that was it. You had the first grade, second grade, so forth. And the 8th grade teacher was not only the teacher, he or she was the principal. He or she was the superintendent. He or she was the finance manager. He or she was a part-time janitor and the school disciplinarian, and I mean disciplinarian. I mean, they didn't fraternize with the students like I went to a school some years ago when I was in business. I couldn't tell the students from the teachers. They were so young, and the kids were in blue jeans, and the teachers were in blue jeans, and the girls, the teachers were in blue jeans. And I'd ask her, could you tell me which one's the teacher? Oh, I'm a teacher. Oh, could you tell me where the principal's office is? I couldn't tell the difference anyway, because that's what happens when you get older. Everybody's awful young, right? Am I speaking too rapidly? No, I'm told I speak too loudly and too rapidly, so. But I got so much to tell you. Oh, it's terrible. It breaks my heart to think I can't tell you much of it. But anyway, that was the school. Oh, and I remember jumping around. In the 7th or 8th grade, I had to stay after school. I was always in trouble one kind or another. Right, I will not throw paper clips anymore. 100 times. Of course, the school bus came. I remember I was on Spoiled Park in those days, not up on Judd Road. And I just after school, of course, the bus went off. Well, how are you going to get home? You got to walk. I had to walk from Staples School all the way down to Sport Hill Parkway. But I didn't go on the roads. You know, we knew all the backwoods like we knew the palm of our hands. Straight lines, as short as between 2 points. That was our route. So that's what happened in those days. Bill James was our president, was our principal up until World War II. Then Bill James became intelligence officer. And I'll just tell you some names. A wonderful man. There's a picture of him there dressed up as a woman in that book with a fellow who used to play what they call donkey baseball. I won't elaborate. You girls can know about that. You can tell them all later on. Donkey baseball. There's a picture of him there. Bill James. He was a short little fellow, but a hell of a nice guy. He just celebrated last year his 100th anniversary, by the way, and he's writing a book. You know, Bill James, boy, he was a wonderful fellow. Not too tall, but of course we were even smaller. And he left in World War II. Then we got Mr. Stevenson. No, we had well, Stevenson, I guess. He was our principal when I graduated. But he only lasted, I think, 1 year. And then Miss Bilash took over. She'd been the 8th grade teacher, 7th grade, or 8th grade teacher, and so on. And she was our 8th grade teacher, too. So she must have been a principal when I was there. But anyway, you're looking at a unique character here. The first man to have a hot lunch while attending Staples School. I fell in Mill River. One of the 100 times I fell in Mill River. Testing the ice, you know, to see if it's thick enough, you know, to stick it on. And I caught pneumonia. Well, I recovered from pneumonia. My mother must have spoken to somebody because the diocese over here, there was a woman there, you probably know who the woman was, her name, right across from the church there. And my mother arranged for me to go over there for hot lunch during lunchtime school here at Staples. So I was the first one. Well, the following year, someone got the word, we had hot lunches. And where were the hot lunches? They were held down in the basement. And they had benches and tables, and they had a little kitchen off there. Boy, I always went for seconds on the ice cream, vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. It came in little wafers like, you know. And I always, Miss Coaches, you got any more ice cream left? Well, I wouldn't go off for recess. I just stayed down there eating ice cream. Ice cream. And all that, talking about Bill James. Must have been in the 7th or 8th grade. The original Staples School, if anyone has you young people know what it's like, it was 6 rooms here, 6 rooms there, auditorium here, a stage there, and the basement. And that was about it. So I was running from first base to second base. Bill James, of course, was just one of the boys. He played along with us too. And he was the first baseman. Yeah, I'm going to work. Threw the baseball. Hit me right back in the head, knocked me cold. Next thing I'm up there, Mr. James. You're right, Brandon. You're right, Brandon. Yes, Mr. James. And we went on with the ball game. But that was a unique little story. And the hot lunches. We graduated in 1938. And of course, as Herb said,
You didn't graduate in 1938. No, 1984.
48. Okay. I stand corrected. Thank you very much.
44, wasn't
Yes, 44. I counted in my notes. That way we moved to Easton. We moved to 36. All right, excuse me. Wait a minute, I gotta get my composure now. Thank you, I need my backup team here. 1944 we graduated. But the point I'm trying to make is that we didn't have in those days a high school. And unlike her here, we went to Whittier Junior High School, which is down the Black Rock section of Bridgeport. Oh, you all know, now you correct me if I start stammering, stuttering, getting confused up here. I don't have stage fright, I'm just, but anyway, so we went to Whittier for our freshman year. And then we theoretically went to Bassett for our sophomore, junior, and senior year. But I only went there for my sophomore year, and then I went away to prep schools. And, but I did play the trumpet in those days. I played all the way through grammar school and there, and loved to go to football games when I was the 1 year I was at Bassett. Jumping back now, maybe I got my dates straight here. We had the hurricane, oh yes, then it was around 1939. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to do this by rush these notes together. I did this 10 times, you know, and I got more confused as I went along. I think it was around 1930 to 1940. Am I over time?
No, well, kind of, but I want to hear the hurricane story, if that's what you're going to tell. Because I would like to know what.
Oh, the hurricane, the Merritt Parkway.
I think that's something.
The Merritt Parkway was built. I crawled under before they even tarred the road, the pipes that go across underneath I crawled all the way. My sister, I'm going to tell Mother on you. I'm going to tell Mother. Well, I got to tell you one more story, too, a dangerous story. Then Sport Hill Parkway, they had the old Sport Parkway, and then they straightened that up while we were living down there, Sport Hill Road. And that cliff, do you know that cliff down there?
Yeah.
I climbed it.
Oh my
Never
God.
told my mother. I got halfway up, I was scared to death. I couldn't go down. So the only witness I had was Elliot Bechtel. He was down there watching me go up that thing, and I could have let him know that I was scared to death. But I couldn't dare go down. I knew I couldn't do it. I had to go all the way up. And I got to the top of a little teeny, a little smaller than my finger, and a little twig of a tree there. And I grabbed that, and the grass kind of grew over that and crawled over it, and I made it. And I went down. But that was the worst thing I ever did in my life, most dangerous thing. So, and I did a lot of them. I was always in trouble one way or another. Oh, by the way, did you know about our police force? I forgot the police force.
No, they wanted you to finish up with the hurricane.
Oh, the hurricane. Yeah, the hurricane. Well, let me tell you a story. I wrote that down here somewhere.
It was an ice storm.
Yeah, it was a hurricane.
It was an ice
Don't
storm.
pay attention to him. He's always giving me a hard time. John and I are old sailing buddies. I used to crew for him. But anyway, we came down, and it was on, where did I write that down? I wrote the,
September, wasn't it?
yeah. Well, I think they let school out early, like about 1 o'clock. We normally think got out at 3, but we got out at 1 or 2. And we went all the way down the back road and over Delaware Road. And there's a little, where did I write that down? I must have, a little brook that goes down there. Well, first of all, I think it was, we got to John Bolshe was our bus driver. And we got to a tree, as I remember, it was about that big around. They come across the road. Well, the bus had to stop. So we got two of the bigger boys, I don't know who they were, but you get the fire axe. You know, all those school buses had a fire axe, a little hydrant in it. You get the fire axe and chop the tree in half and to pull it away off the side of the road so we could keep on going home. So he did that. Then the next thing we came to a little brook down on Delaware Road, and it's one of those, goes under the road, and you know, the little pipe that goes under the road. Well, this thing was 3 feet over the road, it went roaring over the road, the little brook. So, of course, we had to go through that in low gear, very slowly, but we made it. We got down to where Harold Savard lives. Anybody know Harold Savard there? Just north of Sport Hill Parkway on the right, the house there, and that's where the Murphys live. And there's my mother out there at the bus stop waiting for the wind blowing and whipping away, and I think it was raining then too, but she saw that we got over to our home in Sport Hill Parkway out there in the rain. But the wind was blowing over that. And Mill River, what a river that, I don't know what they did. They must have had to open the dam up because there's so much water. And of course, we went out even after the hurricane. We were always up and down that brook there. And there was no brook, it was really a river, roaring. Oh boy, was that something. Well, anyway, that was quite an adventure for a young kid. You remember, we were just like 10 to 12 years old. Well, anyway, I guess I have to stop right now because we didn't watch television, we didn't do anything. We were outside, we didn't play games, everything was outside. Hiking in the woods, playing Indians, cowboys, up and down, swimming in the river, skating down the Mill River, swimming in the Mill River, catching the fish, the trout and the sunfish and the eels, whatever there was, and then swimming. Oh, that was quite a thing. You girls were like this. And
Raymond, I think they want you to finish
oh,
it.
all right. Oh, yeah. It's a shame. I could go on all day long. And
you know,
picking
I could listen
the
to
eels
all
off
these
our backs, you
all
know,
night
we
long.
get bloodsuckers, you know.
But I do want to give John a chance to speak.
All right, John,
And then,
I'm sorry,
and then
John.
we'll try and come back.
Anyway, you're asking about, you know, when I talk about Easton, and growing up in Easton, there's nothing better than that.
Okay, John.
Well, I'm speechless. Well, first I'm going to remark as to what I have done in the town of Easton before I got here, after I got here, because time is getting short. First, I was president of the Easton Volunteer Fire Company at the 50th anniversary in 1971. And while I was there, I brought the first circus to Easton, the Skulls and Gray Circus. And we had 2 sittings of 3,700 people. And we had the handicapped children bussed in from Bridgeport, and we got them into the circus. Number 2, I was master of Aspetuck Lodge. I was a member of the original Ambulance Association. And while I was working with the Ambulance Association, I saved 2 people's lives. One, I had been out selling real estate, and I ended up on the Black Rock Turnpike near Westport Road, when Oscar Severa had pulled up the ambulance, which was an old hearse-body vehicle, which was converted into our first ambulance. And a Fairfield youth boy had coming home, had run into a tree and cut his carotid artery. And luckily I came along, and Oscar said to me, John, we're gonna have to get him in the ambulance quick. And the kid with him, who was from Fairfield U, says, he's from Danbury. He wants to go to the Danbury Hospital. We should have taken the St. P's, it was shorter. So anyway, I stuck my thumb into his neck, and I held it, and Oscar, we got him on it, and up we went. Oscar was going like hell. He's the police chief. And I said, Oscar, slow down. I'm sliding all over the back of the ambulance here, trying to hold on to this guy. And so he slowed down. We got up there. We got to Danbury Hospital. An intern came out, and we pulled the letter out. And the guy says, pull your finger out of his neck. So I pulled it out. He said, there's nothing wrong there. He took a pair of forceps, he touched it and started going, he said, oh, you were right. And it covered in blood. And his father was, who owned the restaurant across from the airport, there was too cheap to pay to have my suit cleaned. That was all right, I had it done. So anyway, that was the first one. Then my daughter, when she was, we were renting a house from Randall across from the antique thing on Sport Hill Road up there, Upper Sport Hill Road, and my daughter swallowed a piece of steak. They had these guys running the barn behind there. They were selling local cow steaks, and they were tough as hell. And she got a piece too big, and she swallowed it. And I looked at her, and her eyes were popping out, and she took a glass of milk, and she went like that. It didn't take me long. I picked her upside down, and all the milk ran out. I said, ah. So I laid her on the floor, and I got under her ribs, and I went, and poof, it popped out. She had been dead. She's now, how old is she now, 61?
64.
64. She was 8 then. So I did my duty there. Yeah. Oh, another one of my accomplishments, I put in the pond up at Christ Church, up here on Stepney Road. And I friends with the Bridgeport Hydraulic Company, and I called Fred Silverman. I said, Fred, have you got an old hydrant? I want to put in a suction hydrant because I'm putting a pond in. I said, I need some forms. He says, oh, we got them down here. We'll deliver them up there for you. So he dropped them up there. And he said, I called up Westport, and I got a kid, his name was Beach. He lived over in the Black Rock Turnpike. He had a half small truck. We went down to Westport. We picked up the hydrant. So I poured. Someone brought up the concrete. I poured the head of the damn board. I finished it off. And I brought my tractor down. I had a hoist on it. And Ken Kinner was the minister at Christ Church then. And I hoisted it up, dropped it down into the hole, hooked the pipes up to the dam, and so forth, and finished that. And it was known as Chatfield's Folly. Everybody said, you know, one fellow belonged to the church, I won't mention his name, he complained and said, well, you know, it's going to raise the insurance rate, people are going to fall in the pond and drown. Where I had it so the pond's about this deep. So they got skate on it. So anyway, that was that. So that's a few things I did while I was in Easton. Now, so I got the church, I got the town a free suction hydrant. So if there's a fire in that end of town, on Church Road or in there, they can go up and they can hook on it because there's no city water over there. Oh yes, okay, now we'll start it here. When I was belonging to active in the fire company, I went to a fire one night down the Silver Hill Road, it was right down the end of it, around the corner. And it was in the walls, and we're down there 12 o'clock at night. And they were trying to chop on a hole through the wall to squirt water in there. So they had 1-inch old planks under the shingle, so the axe was just bouncing off. So I got home that night, and they finally chopped the holes. Took them about a half hour to do while the fire burned out. So I said to myself, you know, there must be an easier way. I got home 1:30 that night. And I went down cellar and I picked up my 1/2-inch electric drill, and I said, why not use a drill and drill a hole, and then you can put the hose in, nozzle in the hole. And then I thought, well, you need electricity then. Maybe they won't have it, or you're not going to be able to get it because the house is involved, blah, blah. So I said, well, maybe we should run water in this handle through an impeller, out the other handle, and make a water-powered drill. And I went to a shop in Stratford where they always owed me money. And I used to go in and I'd say, well, can I use your Bridgeport mill, or I want to work on something? And they'd say, oh yeah, go ahead, use it, John. So later on, as I progressed with this, I finally got a completed drill that would drill at 1,000 RPMs, run by water off a fire hose. You hook the fire hose on it, went through, and then it had a hollow shaft, and there was a nozzle behind the cutter, and it put water in it. It was known as indirect attack. And I demonstrated it in Norfolk, at Philadelphia Navy Yard, and down at the Commerce building in Washington, and I sold that outfit in Westport, set up a company, and they bought it from me. And they hired a vice president of Grinnell in Philadelphia, up there, where the heck is it? I can't think of it. Well, anyway, and they hired a vice president, and they set up a company, they set up a limited partnership, and they got 20 people to put up $75,000 apiece. And that started. And they made a deal with me, which gave me my retirement. And then they hired me back as a consultant at so much a month. And so on. Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
what about your early days?
now, why did we come to Easton to start with? Back in 1933, my mother's dad, my grandfather, his name was Irving Fremont.
Irving Fremont Lewis.
Yeah, Irving Fremont Lewis. He owned a harness shop, a manufacturing place in Bridgeport, and he used to produce saddles for all the elite down in Greenwich, down in Stamford and that area. Plus, he furnished the harnesses for the city of Bridgeport, because in those early days, they used to pull the garbage trucks, wagons by horses. So he had a big customer there, and he sold Easton farmers reins and buggy whips and everything from axle grease to what have you for horses. And what happened was he got ill in his old age, and he was confined to bed, and it got to a point back in '33 when the business was falling off, was bad, and we wanted to. My parents decided we better combine the families, get them together, bring my grandparents in with us. So we needed a house with 5 bedrooms, and we didn't have. There was nothing available down in the area where we lived, and so my grandfather had a sister. Her name was Minnie, and she taught school down here in what do they call it? Bottom of the hill. Plattsville. Yeah, that's right.
Why don't you tell them about
She
moving?
taught at Plattsville School down there in Jefferson Street, and the building's still there. Somebody made a house out of it. And she boarded with the Lacey's, who lived at the bottom of the hill. Now, the Lacey's lived in a house where the old Sport Hill races used to start, where the locomobiles would try to make it up the top of Sport Hill. And the Lacey's had a son, Charlie. And Charlie, they became entrenched, they got married. So she happened to hear that we were looking for, and they lived at, the bottom next to the brook there. The family ran a woolen mill where they used to dye wool and shrink wool for the farmers that sheared the sheep. And when they put the Merritt Parkway and they moved their house over to Jefferson Street, it's sitting on the hill there next to the pumping station for the Bridgeport hydraulic, that brick house, the White House. That was Lacey's place. So anyway, Minnie heard that we were looking for a 5-bedroom house, and she knew Josh Kent up here in Easton. So she called him up. And Josh Kent had sold Herb Silverman's father's farm. He sold the farm up there in the corner of Westport Road and Sport Hill Road, where they want to put in that, what do you call that? Living,
Affordable housing?
Yeah, affordable.
affordable housing. And they really put so many in there, the town doesn't want them. And there's a big to-do. Well, he sold that farm. He sold Snow's, their dairy. He sold Irving's, and then, so anyway, he had got control of a house on the corner of Old Oak Road and Sport Hill Road across from where McQuat lived. And it was owned by originally, the Sherwoods built it back in 1815. And it had 5 bedrooms. So, Minnie called, what's his name?
Josh Kent.
Yeah, John,
Josh.
what?
Josh.
Oh, yeah, Josh Kemp. I'm losing all that. Josh, and Josh says, oh, yeah, well, we got this house. I went 10,000 for it. So my mother and father went up and took a look. My father says, I'll buy it. And Charlie Lacey said to Josh Kent, I want to make a commission on this. So Josh Kent paid him $500 out of the 10,000 commission. And here's Charlie's uncle. And he was a little money hungry, but that was all right. So anyway, that's how we ended up in Easton. And we brought my grandfather up, picked him up in an ambulance, and he was bedridden. And in the meantime, his harness business was being run by a fellow by the name of John Dalton down on John Street in Bridgeport. And as a kid, I used to go into the place where they made harnesses and saddles and things. And he had got a horse from P.T. Barnum when they had their winter quarters in Bridgeport. And it's a model. It was a white horse, and it was on a board with wheels underneath. It was life size, and he wheeled it. They had it wheeled in the window in the front of his store. And he used to put a saddle on it, and I'd get up in it when I was about 4 years old or 3 years old, waving people going right down John Street on this horse. So anyway.
John, why don't you
But-
tell him what you did as a boy for amusement?
What's that?
Why don't you tell him what you did as a boy for amusement?
Oh, yeah, I'll get into that right now. Let's get into that. So when I got, as a boy, when I got up here, I went into Save Us, which was built in 30. We got it, she was 3 years old. Winnie Kent was running the 8th grade, and she was a principal at school. Logan, I'm sorry, Winnie Logan. And I forget who was my 7th grade teacher, but I can't remember her name now. But I used to, well, anyway, let's see, where was I going?
Miss Mannion or Miss Violet?
What?
7th grade teacher.
Maybe it was me, I used to be a teacher there.
No, it wasn't you. Okay, so when we came to Easton, what we did was this. One of the first things I did was, when we got the house, half the barn they wanted to take down. Josh Kent wanted to move. Part of the deal was we'll take half the barn down to Sport Hill because he had cows, and they were running a dairy there when we bought the thing, and they had about 100 cows in it. So they took down half of it, and they left some boards behind. So I went up to the hill later on and I built the playhouse out up there for Harold McQuat and I built this house. We had a couple bunks in it. We used to go down and sleep there nights once in a while, so forth. We had a stove in there where we could cook and this, that, you know. Well, anyway, to keep ourselves busy, most of the kids, a lot of kids were doing hunting and they were doing trapping. And they were trapping fox and everything from muskrats and so forth. And a lot of the kids carried a little 32 caliber revolver in their pocket, and because on their way to school they'd stop to visit their traps. If there was a fox in there, they'd shoot him, pick him up on the way home, because they were selling the furs. So that was all right. So Winnie Logan used to have a collection period when everybody had to open their pockets up, and she'd take the guns and throw them in the wastebasket. And then later on, they would take them out and throw them in the trash barrel where they were burning the trash. And then days later, the kids would go through there and find the guns, black, all burned and so forth. That was part of the laugh. And then what we did is we went down and Sam Senior let us use his brook down. He owned from Sport Hill Road all the way through to Park Avenue. He owned about 150 or 200 acres. And we put in a swimming hole. Well, we used to go down and swim. And then I got the idea one year to make an ice boat, so I made up an ice boat. My friend Ashley Matthews, who lived over in Black Rock Turnpike, opposite the Aspetuck Reservoir, he made an ice boat, and we used to go out and sail up and down the Aspetuck Reservoir with him. And Frank Hubble at the time was managing the thing. He knew us, and he just passed it off. He said, "You guys can do it," and that's that. So the hydraulic never caused us any trouble. Then there was, then we used to, when we arrived in 33, all the roads in Easton were dirt, other than Black Rock Turnpike and Sport Hill Road. Everything else was dirt. Center Road, all of them, dirt roads. And we used to ride down to Westport on the dirt road before they put in the Merritt Parkway and go to the movies for 15 cents on a Saturday. We ride our bikes on, then we'd ride it back on. There was very little traffic on the Westport Road. And then I used to date a young lady. Her name was Hubble. She lived in that antique Hubble house over there, the Bradley Hubble house. And her mother used to keep an eye on us. And she suggested one day we ought to go in the kitchen and make fudge. So we went out to keep us busy. We went out and made fudge. I made fudge. So I did fudge making in that antique house. Okay. By the way, when I was president of the fire company, I used to play with Helen Keller's yard band. Ray, what's his name? Herb Hass. Actually, it was Hollis, but they call it Hass. We used to play poker and pinochle at the firehouse. And I used to go over there and see him once in a while, and Helen Keller would come up, she'd grab me by the face. She said, "Oh, you're John Chatfield, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, that's who I am." Yeah. She could tell by feeling your face who you were. So I had a lot of interesting experiences at Easton. Let's see what I missed here. Oh, by the way, when we first got here, they used to have just the peace courts, but later on, I forget just what year it was, 37 or in there somewhere, they switched to trial justice court. You had to be a lawyer in order to get the job. And my father was the first judge in Easton as trial justice. And then this went on for a number of years. And then the Democrats couldn't get elected in any of these towns. So what they did is that they got up at Hartford, and they put through the law and made them call circuit courts. We used to call them circus courts, but they called them circuit courts. So they could get into the act. So anyway, that was another story. So anyway, when my father was in there, he got Oscar Severe the job as chief after Ed Knight retired. And he headed the Board of Education, and he moderated the town meetings, and he used to counsel the young boys where they got in trouble. He would counsel them and say, lay off, don't do that had been brought in for some misfeasance or something.
All right,
Okay,
I don't want,
excellent.
I hate to
Okay.
interrupt because, you know, like I said before, we can stay and listen to.
Oh, by the way,
Candy,
I
go
got,
ahead.
I got movies showing the water, showing the ice boats, the swimming hole and all that. I got them on a tape. Sometime, if you'd like to see them, we can play them on this thing here. It shows early East, all the stuff, everything from Camp Pomperog up there, Newtown, where Easton boys used to go as Boy Scouts, and Boy Scouts used to go up there, and so forth.
We
I'm
have
sure.
the tape here, we can put the tape on, when we're done, and I can have it in the background.
Oh, you have a machine?
Yeah, I
Oh,
know how to,
okay.
I know how to work it, it's
Oh,
like,
okay,
show me
okay.
how.
Sorry.
Yeah, so
Now
we'll
it's-
do that, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, we're back to he has work to do, as you probably imagine. But I would like, I have a million questions, but you guys should go first, so, if you have any questions for them, please ask them. Aaron?
I'd just like to talk to John for a minute. I was chief in Westport Fire Department when you came out with that drill. And I remember
I've had a demonstration.
the Sherman brothers were the twins
Shermans.
that took the patent
Yeah.
with it. And we went over to Fairfield and we drilled holes through the cement blocks and everything else. It was a very great invention.
I got movie set on this tape, so I can show them anytime you people want to see it.
By the way, John, regarding that drill, in the fire magazines, they are using that same drill, except for the pressure coming out of the hose to propel the drill. They have a hydraulic a pump that runs it, but it's the same darn drill, and that's advertised in the fire magazines. I've seen it a number of times. Have you ever seen that, Priscilla? Yeah, the same drill theory they use.
Well, I got the money on it.
Well, I don't know about that, but John, the money, but I know that John's was very good because
Let me
what it did,
John, no.
you were using it in water,
I
because
have
you don't
one
want to
thing
let.
I have one thing to say, Brader. That payment on that took me through Europe, took me through the Caribbean,
that's-
paid off the mortgage, bought 2 cars, went into the stock market, and God only knows what else. So quite a- and-
Well, I'm not talking
and
about the money
retired.
end of it, I'm talking about the theory. It was a very good theory. And as a volunteer fireman, he did all this, so that's pretty good. It paid to be a fireman, volunteer. But what was nice about it, it had a lever on it, because John showed it to me, and I saw the finished product. And I was an old friend of John's, been sailing with him a lot, and so you pull a lever. Once you got the water going through, and drill a hole with a diamond bit on it, which is about that big around, and it's just the right size for the now you could pull one lever down, and now it was a hose squirting water in there. And on a ship, they can go through a bulkhead and ship that, turn that to steam, as he was explaining to me. He didn't elaborate on it, but it was quite an idea, a very clever idea.
Mark, you a salesman, Gregory.
Yeah, he was.
Were there, did anybody else have any questions?
I just would like to ask, I couldn't make out the name of, who was it that owned all that land, you said, and sold the land for the Snows, and sold the
Oh,
land?
Josh Kent?
What was that name?
Josh Kent?
Josh
Oh,
Kent.
Josh Kent, I see.
I can tell you a story about John. I'll be very
John,
short.
no,
Okay.
no.
I'll be very short.
Tell one short story.
I'll tell you something, it's sort of shocking. His father, Robert Kent, was in England. And he had some problems with some women over there. They ran him out of town. And he came over here. And Josh was born over here, but his father came from England.
He was in
That's
jail
the
in
story on
England.
the Kents.
I'm sure they're all real good, so I figured that story got out. Does anybody have any other questions? Because actually,
I have one question.
yeah, go ahead.
My father, you probably know Wesley Norton, he used to tell a story about how they used to have circuit, traffic court on Black Rock Turnpike. That there was that the guy who was the school bus driver was the judge, and he'd go down, I think it was across the
Mr.
street.
Hill, was his name Hill?
I don't remember the name.
That was way back.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
they came in 1926, so it would have to be somewhere around this area. I mean, when they,
Well,
do
John's
you remember
having
that?
that
I never heard anything more about it,
And he
except
used
for
to
that,
drive
and I
the
was
bus.
wondering. And he was the judge?
I think so.
Yeah, that's what he said. So he was the, I don't know, he was the judge and they had a traffic court on Blackburn Turnpike. Oh, I think where the Shinadis lived, or they used to live. Or was it across the street?
I think it's across the street.
Across the street in the White House at the bottom of Norton Road.
I was just gonna add, John mentioned Oxford Square. I can remember one time, I lived down in the south end of town, over by South Park Avenue. And we had a couple hunters in the backyard, and I mean literally in the backyard. We had about 3 acres down there at that point. And they were firing. And so Dad decided he wanted to get Oscar down there to take care of the situation. But at that particular time, you had to call the dispatcher in Bridgeport. There was no radio in his car, so we had to wait for Oscar to stop at Halifax and use the phone there to be able to phone down to the dispatcher and find out that Dad had called. And that was about 3/4 of an hour later. It wasn't bad response time given what he had to go through. But that was long before radios started to become part of the.
We used to have party telephone, I think, when
Party
I
telephone,
first
yeah.
came up here.
Yeah.
Right.
Didn't last too long.
That should actually
Listen to
leave
other people's
a nice segue.
conversations.
I wanted to know if anybody here wanted to relate any incidences or any stories from their own past, because we had 4 people that we had asked prior to come and talk, but is anybody here that has any stories that they'd like to share? Because I'd love to hear them. Go ahead.
I just saw Oscar and Bill James. I used to play hooky a lot, and Danny. But they used to come up and pick me up. They were my school bus driver.
Huh.
Other than that,
Now, how many school buses were there?
Fred Candy,
4
John
about.
Moultrie, Art Dreesen, Tucker Brothers.
Tucker Brothers, yeah.
They had the cheese box on wheels, remember?
We had only one policeman, I remember that, the night, remember that?
Todd Constable, that night was the first one we had. And John Volsey was one of the school bus drivers. Fred Candy was another school driver. Dreesen, Art Dreesen was another school bus driver. And I don't know who the 4th one was, I can't remember. But what?
Skipper used to drive the bus too.
Skip was
Who?
later.
Skip Toth?
Oh, Skip, well, that was after my time.
Tucker Brothers.
Tucker Brothers was that.
But I remember Dreesen.
The first school bus in Easton was run by a guy named Williams, who was running the Bluebird Inn before.
John Volsey ran the old Bluebird Inn. And Art Dreesen ran the new Bluebird Inn.
Before Voltry arrived.
Okay.
Yeah, to me, that's what was
And they called it the cheese box on wheels. It was long, thin, and square. And it was a real ancient thing. And they picked up everybody on the Black Rock Turnpike and so forth.
And John,
Then Fred Candy came along, he was next.
you mentioned the dirt roads in Easton. Now, maybe you people remember it, but Ray Candy told me about the old days when they didn't plow the roads, you know. They had a big barge, and they put stones on the barge to give it weight, and oxen to pull the barge. They would pack the snow down so hard that the old-fashioned cars could ride on the snow, and the sleighs could ride on the snow, or whatever. I don't know the details, but he said that. Is that right, John? Do you remember that?
I don't
Well, Ray
recall.
Candy told me that story. So, and of course, there wasn't much traffic in those days, even World War II, with gas rationing. We used to take our sleds up the top of Sport Hill Road and slide all the way down Sport Hill Road, right about the time they straightened it out, which was just before the war, right after the war, whatever it was. Yeah, boy, that was a hell of a walk up the hill, but boy, what a ride down it was. And you know, it didn't have to have a lot of snow, even if they plowed. Then they used to plow the road. I don't know how many trucks they had.
My father was.
But the cars would come home after work, you know, during the World War II, right? And at first we get stuck up about where the new Sport Hill Road and the old Sport Hill Road converge, going up. And the first car would get to about there and get stuck. And then the next one would be there, and they'd be all like this, you know, all down the road. And so they'd go into Harold Bechtel's house, and Mrs. Bechtel used to make a big king of coffee, and they'd wait there for the town plow, one and only, I guess, to show up and plow the road and sand it so they could get home. But they'd sit there for an hour probably having coffee and shooting the breeze. In those days, everybody knew everybody in town anyway, so even that during World War II time, there was still a small population, around 1,000 people, I think it was. So it was nice. And then in Spoil Parkway, they had a contest where they all decorated the houses. The front doors, they'll put a door, and then have a prize, you win it, in the Garden Exchange Club. Then they had community Christmas tree, and there's a pictures of old Fred Candy with the oxen towing one of the big Christmas trees. I mean a big one. Oh gee, I don't know, 20 feet long, whatever. Big one. They put it down there right by what's that road? Sport Hill Parkway, and that road that goes
On
up.
the corner where that Barbara Broderick lives.
Yeah, where Barbara Broderick. That first one was a chop tree down there. But there is a picture, and it must be in the history book around here someplace, of Fred Candy and my father, who arranged all this, I guess, walking along with him, dragging that thing with the oxen, you know, with the big thing on it. Very picturesque, yeah. So, I mean, it was a very small community, so a lot going on. You know, we made our own fun. But that ride down Sport Hill Parkway, those were the days. No traffic, you know, because of gas racing and whatnot. And then the Victory Gardens, everybody hear of Victory Gardens?
Yeah.
Well, I want to tell you, down at Sport Hill Park, we had a Victory Garden behind the Mulford House, where Savard lives now. There was a lot, oh gosh, 3 times the size of this little room. So all the neighbors, they said, oh, we're going to participate in our Victory Garden. Well, no one knew anything about gardens. Irv should be here. Well, they plowed and they came home from work and they worked on it, and some man would come home with a new fertilizer, was just the thing. Well, the tomatoes were so acidy, the corn was full of worms, everything was full of worms, you couldn't eat anything. But that was a complete fiasco, the Victory Garden. I don't know how they did in other communities, but I know Easton Victory Garden was down in Sport Hill Park, was a flop. It was a total flop. But it was a lot of fun, community participation, and a wonderful town.
What did he say about the $100 houses? Or
Oh,
talking
and-
about that? I didn't quite catch that.
He was saying that when they were putting the, I guess the first Easton Dam down at where Easton Lake is now, that they were selling those. Was he talking about the Hemlock one? Oh, maybe it was Hemlock. I'm sorry, maybe Hemlock. That fit in with the years? Oh yeah, I guess it does. Yeah. He was saying that Bridgeport Hydraulic would sell you a house for $100 if you take it apart, take it away.
So that was on the land that
That's-
gets flooded, and then they.
Yes, and then they
sold
flooded
that
that all in.
land.
Because either they had to take the houses down and burn them down.
So the first
either
silver
way-
house was one of those $100 houses, right? So he said.
He was saying his house, yes, the house,
Okay, I didn't know
the
that.
house that's right by their farm. We're gonna wrap it up, I guess. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
everybody.
Irv, who is in absentia right now, but thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story.
So much. We're only hit the tip of the iceberg.